Session with Dr. Farid Holakouee.
Good evening and welcome to In Session with Dr. Farid Holakouee. I'm your host, Dr. Farid Holakouee, and I'll be with you for the next hour here on Radio Hamra. Studio number 310-441-0555. But I do have a guest tonight who I'll introduce to you shortly, so if you do call, I hope that you will call for her and the topic that we are talking about. But before I do introduce her, I did want to share a few words on what most people of Iranian background or descent are thinking about today, which was Iran's performance in the World Cup. And like many of you out there, I was watching on the edge of my seat and was so excited and can't believe that Iran got so close to actually winning the group when it included Spain and Portugal and even Morocco, who's a very strong team. But that was incredible and, of course, heartbreaking at the end, but we are very proud of the team and what they accomplished, and a young team, so hopefully future World Cups we can fare even better. So congratulations, Team Melli. Actually, I liked hearing the announcers on the American station. They kept saying Team Melli, but they really did a great job, and we're proud of them and the fight they put and how close they got. And really to get 4 points in that group was incredible. So very proud of them, and we hope to see them in the next World Cup go even further and make us even more proud. But let me introduce my guest tonight. I've had her on the show several times, so listeners might be familiar with Dr. Jennifer Galvan, but I'll introduce you to her again. She is a licensed clinical psychologist in private practice in Woodland Hills. She received her Bachelor of Arts from San Diego State University, where she majored in psychology, and then she earned a Master of Arts in Clinical Psychology and a PhD in Clinical Psychology from Alliant International University. That's actually where we met and completed our PhDs together. She also obtained advanced clinical training in psychoanalytic psychotherapy at the New Center for Psychoanalysis, where she earned a certificate in psychoanalytic psychotherapy, and her office number is 818-538-5236. Dr. Galvan, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I always enjoy being here and talking about very important topics.
Yes, and today we are talking about a very important and serious topic, and one that I regularly cover on this show because I think it is so important, and that is suicide. Suicide is one of those very important things that unfortunately is a big taboo and has a lot of stigmas attached to it, and it's one of those things that people think they shouldn't talk about, or there's even misconceptions about if you talk about it, it can become more likely, or we should avoid talking about it, things that we will cover today. And especially with the recent suicides of Anthony Bourdain and Kate Spade, which shocked a lot of people and surprised people and made people very upset, we saw much more media coverage about suicide, which of course it's very unfortunate that those two individuals took their own lives, but it did bring about some awareness, or even more awareness, to something that is affecting all people all the time, because it doesn't discriminate between any sex or gender or ethnicity or socioeconomic status. It can affect anyone, and it is unfortunately a real thing that we have to deal with. And the reason why we want to talk about it today is to make it even more real and realize that it's not going to go away by not talking about it. We need to make it easier to have conversations on this topic. And so we're hoping to facilitate that a bit today in what we talk about. So Dr. Jennifer Galvan, we're going to be talking about suicide, and people can call in 310-441-0555 if they have thoughts or questions about the topic that they wanted to mention. But maybe starting us off, did you want to share some words?
I was just going to say, it has been a popular thing that has come up in the media, unfortunately, because of what's happened. However, this is something so, unfortunately, again, so common and happens every day to a lot of people. And it should be an ongoing conversation or an open discussion, because people are struggling with this on a daily basis.
Right.
Even people that you would never imagine are struggling with this, people close to us, coworkers, kids, all sorts of people. So it's really important that even when the media coverage dies down and
Yes.
that slows down, that we keep up our end of it and continue the conversation and the openness, because,
Yeah.
you know, all sorts of people are struggling with this, not just celebrities or people that are well known.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think that's a great point because, when something like this happens, two suicides in a short period of time from two high-profile individuals, there's a lot of coverage, but in all likelihood, that does go away or slow down, and we want to make sure that the conversations continue, that it doesn't stop. And yes, of course, it's heartbreaking that these two people ended their lives, but we know that it's heartbreaking that it's happening every day to everyday people as well.
Yeah, it makes us hypersensitive for a short period of time. And then we may end up going back to our old patterns
Right.
and overlooking things or not knowing how to deal with things. So I'm hoping that out of tonight's hour, we can get some key points that stick with everyone on how to address this really serious topic.
Absolutely, absolutely, which we'll talk about. And some of our focus will be on talking about suicide with children, both about what they hear about suicide and also they themselves dealing with suicide, whether it's friends or their own suicidal thinking or plans if it gets to that point. So that's going to be a primary focus, but we'll talk about suicide in general. Maybe you could start us off with some statistics about suicide.
Sure. So, as I was doing some research on the statistics for suicide, I was even shocked to come up to see some of these numbers that were coming up. And it's really sad and really unfortunate, but it's reported that every day 105 people die from suicide, and that every 12 minutes someone commits suicide. So, that was shocking to me. This goes to show how many people are actually struggling with this, and that this is something that I think is too commonly overlooked, and not most people don't know how to address it or talk about it, and so it just slips under the radar until
Yeah.
something really traumatic happens.
Especially for young people, it's a very one of the highest causes, right?
Yeah, so it's the second leading cause of death for youth ages 10 to 24,
Wow.
and about 18% of high school students admit to thinking about suicide. And so those are the 18% are the ones that openly will admit it. However, there's, I'm sure, a significant number that have passive thoughts of suicide, that probably just didn't want to say that they have that. I think also sometimes people can't really differentiate between what the passive thoughts of suicide may look like, and will think, oh, well, I'm not suicidal because I don't actually want to kill myself. But you can have suicidal thoughts that are really passive, like, I just wonder what it would be like if I'm not here anymore. Or what's the point? What's the purpose in me being here? Even something like that could be considered a suicidal thought to some degree. And it's important to take those seriously and into consideration and not swept under the rug.
Right. Yeah. And I think, you mentioned suicidal thoughts, and like anything, there's a big range as far as what we mean when we talk about suicidal thinking or thoughts of suicide. And truth be told, most people at some point in their life will have a thought of suicide at some degree, whether it's the passive type, which you talked about, which we might get into a little bit more, or a more serious one. It's something that almost everyone will have experienced, or if not everyone, definitely someone you're very close to. Because these thoughts come to our mind when things get difficult, when you're feeling depressed, stressed, overwhelmed. Sometimes they can come to you anxious. Exactly. These thoughts will come to you. And the reason why I'm emphasizing that is for a few reasons. One is that if you have those thoughts, you're definitely not alone, or it's nothing to be ashamed of, or something really bad that only you're experiencing. It's very, very common. And also so that we can talk about it, because we should realize that it's something that everyone is going through. It's just like mental health issues in general, where the stigma makes it where people think, well, I'm the only one who's this anxious or this depressed or going through this, so I should hide it from people. But unfortunately, we don't realize everyone else is dealing with their own things too, and it would be much better if we talked about it. Thoughts of suicide, in a way, are similar in that it's much, much more common than most people would think. And so we have to make it something that's okay to talk about. It doesn't need to be a taboo.
Yeah, of course, there's a huge stigma attached to suicide or suicidal thoughts.
Hmm.
But as you mentioned, like most things, feelings of depression, feelings of anxiety, all of these feelings and thoughts are normal. And the more we can talk about that and the more that we can be open and honest about it, the more comfort we can find
Hmm.
because there's a lot of similarity that lies amongst us. And everyone knows what it feels like to feel bad. Everyone knows what it feels like to be overwhelmed. Everyone has moments where they just want to escape in their own way. And so talking about it will gather support and it'll bring people together to not feel so lonely
Hmm.
and so different and outcasted from having these thoughts. Unfortunately, we don't talk about it. Nobody really brings it up. People are scared to bring it up. People are worried about planting ideas. Um, they don't know how to bring it up. They don't know what to say. And that goes on both ways, whether you're
Hmm.
concerned and you don't know what to say, or whether you're the one having the suicidal thoughts. You don't know
Right.
how to approach the situation and what to say. But it's really, really important that we talk about it. Even if you don't talk about it in the best way, just talking about it in general is always better than avoiding it.
Right. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about is that as parents especially, but even whoever it is, as a friend, loved one, you want to make some bridges, that I like to say, of certain topics that you can talk about. And suicide is one of those that should be okay to be talked about. And the only way you can make it okay, especially as a parent, is to introduce it yourself very often. Your child might not bring it up. And we'll talk about ways that you can do that. But we want that to enter into the topics that can be covered. Because in a lot of families, that's a topic that cannot be brought up no matter what. And you should avoid it. And even if you do bring it up, it's, as you said, swept under the rug, or we deny it or avoid it because we don't know what to do. It makes us anxious. We feel overwhelmed. And we feel like the easiest thing to do is to pretend like it didn't happen, or, oh, it's just a phase or a comment they said, they don't mean it. But as we'll get to, you want to always take it seriously. But what's something we brought up that I want to also mention. So there is things like passive suicidal ideation, which could be things like, I wish I died, or maybe I wonder what it would be like if I died, or I don't know if I can take this anymore. So there isn't actually an active element to it where someone's thinking, this is what I want to do to
Right.
take my own life.
I hope I don't wake up
Right.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
What it's better, everyone's better off if I'm not here.
Hmm.
Those are really common ones that you would hear. And as I mentioned earlier, they should be taken just as seriously as someone saying, I want to kill myself by shooting myself in the head. It's really no different because they all resemble a layer of having this deep, dark sadness and these suicidal thoughts, and they should all be addressed in the same way. It's important to take it all into consideration, to not overreact or underreact, but to really just be with the person that's sharing this and to help understand where their suffering is coming from
Hmm.
and listen and help guide them in the right way.
Right. And I think, something related to what you mentioned is you don't have to be worried about planting the idea of suicide into someone's head. That's a big reason why people avoid talking about it. Even, I'm sure you might remember, I remember as a therapist in training, they would tell us that don't be afraid to bring it up. And I would feel some anxiety very early on when I was seeing my first clients to bring up that topic, because you do worry, well, if they say yes, what am I going to do? Or if I say they might feel uncomfortable. It's just an uncomfortable thing for most people to talk about. But they made it very clear to us that you're not going to plant this idea into someone's head. If someone is very depressed or overwhelmed or stressed, that idea will come to them, or it's something that they have.
And it can be relieving
Yeah.
even to have someone else say it for you or to
Hmm.
acknowledge that, because even if you have those feelings, that's not going to be the first thing that you want to open up with and talk
Right.
about openly. So if somebody else actually directly asks you the question, there can actually be some relief
Right.
in having that conversation open up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what I always say is, if you ask someone about if they're feeling suicidal or not, a few things can happen. One is, let's say they're not, and maybe at worst they kind of laugh or they joke, I can't believe you thought I was that depressed or that down. I'm okay. And that's fine. Nothing's going to happen. But even more important than that is what you've also done, as I was saying before, is you've created a bridge between you and that person, that this is a topic you can talk to me about.
Mhm.
I'm not afraid of this topic. If you are ever feeling that way, you do know you can talk to me. And that's a really important thing, that someone is, oh, this guy's or this girl's not afraid to talk about that. My mom or my dad is not afraid for me to mention that if it ever does become an issue for me in my life. And of course, the other alternative is they actually are suicidal, and you potentially could be saving their life. Because just because someone has decided to even take their own life, you can stop them. There can be help and intervention. It doesn't mean they definitely will take their life. So I'm here with Dr. Jennifer Galvan, and we're talking about the very important topic of suicide, to hopefully have our own conversation here on the air to make it more likely that people at home will have these conversations about suicide. And of course, you can join the conversation by calling in 310-441-0555. You're listening to In Session with Dr. Farid Holakouee. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm joined again by Dr. Jennifer Galvan. We were talking about suicide, and we wanted to, you wanted to share some signs that parents could maybe look out for with their kids. Now, one thing I want to make very clear, and I'm sure you'll also make this clear, is that there's no recipe that we for sure know your child is or is not, and kids can express a lot of things in a lot of different ways. So we don't want to, on one hand, alarm parents that if you see anything close to any of these things, your child is definitely suicidal, but we also don't want parents to ignore the signs of mental health issues, because of course suicide is an extreme action taken related to mental health issues, emotions, and things like that. So these are things to think about in general. Even if your child is not suicidal and they're experiencing these things, you want to take it seriously. So what might be some signs that parents should definitely look out for, or you think is important for parents to be aware of?
So, some of the most obvious ones would be if your child is talking about wanting to die
Mm-hmm.
or even says, I want to kill myself. That's an obvious sign that they are thinking about suicide. If you see that they're looking for a way to kill themselves, so they might have more interest in a firearm all of a sudden that you've had in the home for years, if you see that they've accumulated some medication in some part of the home for some reason, if find information on their laptop about them Googling things like how to kill themselves, those would be definitely some signs to be aware of. A lot of these symptoms are very common to feelings of depression, and as we talked about over the break, some of it can even overlap with some common behaviors or feelings of adolescence.
Mm-hmm.
So, talking about feeling hopeless or having no purpose, again, doesn't necessarily mean that they're suicidal, but definitely something to consider. If the child is feeling like they have no purpose here on earth, they don't know why they're here, they wish they weren't here, those are definitely things to keep in mind. Talking about feeling trapped or being in unbearable pain, it shows the level of suffering that they're in and that they feel stuck. They can't come up with any solutions,
Mm-hmm.
any alternatives to get them out of their pain.
Right, and those are especially important because suicide, in a way, is like a last resort when people
Right.
feel hopelessness is a big indicator of
Yes.
suicide, or very much related to it. So when you hear those kinds of things, like you said, feeling trapped, feeling stuck, feeling like they can't handle it anymore,
There's no option left.
right, they feel like there's no other option, that's when suicide unfortunately seems like the only option or the best option, because the pain is unbearable and they see no hope of making it better or changing it. So those words that you said, those are key ones to listen out for. Variants of that hopelessness or that feeling stuck is very important to pay attention
And
to.
sometimes it can be irrational. So from the parent's perspective, it's this, there's still options. We haven't tried
Right.
medication. We haven't tried a therapist. We haven't tried all these things. But in their mind, it feels like
Yes, that's
there's
a good
no
point.
hope.
Mhm.
It feels like nothing's going to help. No one's going to understand. Or I've done this before. Or so-and-so did this before. It didn't help. No one will understand my level of suffering and pain. So in their minds, it feels like there's no option. Not
That's a
that
great
in
point.
actuality there is not.
Well, because as someone like you and me probably believe suicide is not the right choice no matter what, essentially. So we don't think it's the right choice, but that's how they feel. I think that's a really good point, because a parent might think, oh, some kids are teasing her at school, or, it's just some teasing. It happens to everyone, or it's not that big
Mm-hmm.
of a deal, or things can change, or they will change. And this is where empathy and trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes is important, where, like you said, to them, it could feel unbearable. You might not even think it's a big deal, or you might think, who cares, or it's going to change, or, oh, you're going to get older and not care about any of these
Mm-hmm.
things. But you have to put yourself in their shoes and realize, okay, for them, it's feeling unbearable. And that's what matters, is their experience, because they're the one that would feel like they can't go on.
It's important to be conscious of our own reactions because I
Hmm.
think as parents, or even if you're not a parent, just being a friend or a family member, we want to rationalize the situation as a way of protecting ourselves as well. And so we'll come up with all sorts of solutions and answers and
Hmm.
we'll think in a rational way, but we have to understand what they're going through. So
Right.
really put yourself in their shoes, and if they're telling you that the pain is unbearable, if their suffering is never ending, then we really have to listen to that instead of rationalize.
Yeah. But a key word there was listen to. So, you could try to put yourself in someone's shoes, but you really will never be able to. The best thing you can do is to ask them how they're doing and what's going on, and
And
let them
believe
tell you,
them.
and believe them. And that's
Yeah.
the big part that I think we wanted to get into next. But yeah, you got to ask them. And this is where, when we say believe them, it means that if they bring up suicide in any way, you take it seriously every time.
Hmm.
And I always say, it doesn't mean you call 911 immediately. That's not what I mean by take it seriously, but that you don't ignore it. You talk about it. You say, if they said, oh, I just want to kill myself, as they stormed off into the room and closed their door. You don't just say, oh, she was just mad, or he was just angry. You actually, maybe when things actually, it's probably better when they've calmed down, let them know, I'm concerned that you just, you said that, and I don't know if you just said it in the moment, but I'm concerned that you brought that up.
It's really important, like you're saying with this topic, to not, as I mentioned earlier, not overreact or underreact.
Hmm.
If you overreact, it'll close off any future communication
Right.
with the person. And if you underreact, then the person may feel like you're not taking them seriously, um, or you're really not listening and you're not being with them. So any thoughts or talk of suicide should always be revisited, and that's you have to keep in mind that suicide is an attempt to solve a problem that seems impossible to solve in any other way. So you have to ask about the problem that's going on that created the suicidal thoughts. And you
Hmm.
really want to keep a balance with your reaction to not overreact and not underreact in these situations.
I think that's a great point, obviously, just in general, and how you, in empathizing with your child. Because, some parents think I'm going to show them I care by reacting so much. They fall, and you go, overreact. And Persians are actually very good at this. We can
Hmm.
be very histrionic, so they can overreact. And we think it's showing how much we care. But if you react so strongly, it could be overwhelming for the child, where they think, I'm a burden on you, or I can't handle
Right.
your reaction, so I don't want to show you things
And
anymore.
then
I
they
don't
have
want
to
to tell
take
you
care
things.
of you as well.
Exactly.
And the next one I was going to mention is if the child's talking about being a burden.
Hmm.
So if they feel like they're causing too much pain, suffering, stress, anxiety for their parent,
Right.
they're not going to come out and say, by the way, I'm having thoughts of killing myself,
Hmm.
because they don't want to add to the burden. So,
Yeah, that's a great point. And another reason why parents, you have to make sure you're taking care of yourself emotionally, because your kids, they're paying attention. You might think, a lot of parents say, oh, they don't know that I stress over this, or that I worry about them about this. Like, no, they pick up on it, even if you don't explicitly state it, but especially if you do. And yeah, unfortunately, one of the reasons why people get to that point is they feel like, the people around me that I love, they'd be better off without me.
mhm.
And so if they feel like they're a burden on you, mom and dad stress so much about me, like they're getting sick, they're getting this, they're getting that, they'd probably be better off without me. Unfortunately.
Other things I've heard is them say, it's better if I just stay home in bed and not go with them because my mood will ruin their
Hmm.
day.
Hmm.
My mood will mess everything up for them. So there's this constant consideration of how they will impact others and how they'll ruin everything and how they'll burden
Yeah.
them. And so they'd rather just withdraw and exclude themselves from family situations, friends,
Hmm.
parties, everything so that they're not a burden.
Which could contribute further to their depression or whatever they're going through. And I think, this to me is, obviously, we're talking about how uncomfortable it is for people to talk about suicide, which is very common. But if we take that even a step further, further back in a way, people can have such a hard time just with the negative emotions in general, like sadness and anger, and they can have very little tolerance first for their own, which is why they act this way with their kids, but then for their kids' emotions. So
Mm,
their kids are sad and they can, oh, don't be in a bad mood. You should not be sad, or you should be happy, and try to pressure their kids into being happy because they can't tolerate, one, the negative emotions, and two, the implication they have in their own head that if you're sad, I'm somehow a bad mom or dad.
right.
So they don't give their kids the space to even have those sad feelings. So they hide even more than just suicide. They hide even when it's sad. And so that's why it's important for parents to realize your kids are supposed to feel sad sometimes. They're going to feel all sorts of feelings. Your job isn't to make them feel something. It's actually to empathize and validate whatever it is they're feeling and to be there with them with whatever they're feeling. So if you make them feel like their sadness is so overwhelming for you, well, of course, they're not going to come to you when it becomes really bad. And that's the scary thought.
Right, exactly. And along with that, they might feel like if they're not there, it'll help you.
Unfortunately. And that relates to this other idea where people unfortunately will say, oh, so and so is so selfish to take their own life. They
Yes.
have a kid or they
Yes.
have this or they have family. And I think it's so heartbreaking when they say that. And yes, of course, we know that suicide affects so many people around the person. Kevin Hines, who was on the show a couple years ago, who he tried to take his own life jumping off of the Golden Gate Bridge, but thankfully did not die, and now goes around the world talking about suicide and doing incredible work. But he's worked on this movie, and I think it's actually out now, called The Ripple Effect, basically talking about how one suicide, there's like a ripple effect, and it affects so many people. So absolutely, suicide does affect many people who are close to that person, but we have to understand that the person is feeling so down, is feeling in such a dark place. Their brain, you might read something that kind of explains this better later on, but their brain is in such a bad place that suicide actually seems like a good option. They actually feel like, I'm hurting people around me. They'll be better off without me. They're
Right.
not doing it in a selfish way to take themselves away from people. And unfortunately, that's further adds a stigma to suicide, that these people are being selfish
Yeah, they're
when
not
they
trying to
take their life.
inflict pain on their loved
Right.
ones. They're trying to just
Quite
remove
the
their own
opposite.
pain,
Yeah, and they're trying to, maybe they think, remove the burden from
alleviate.
other people,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And so it's heartbreaking, but I think that notion of calling the person selfish, I think it goes, unfortunately, a long way in adding to the stigma.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yes. So continuing on with some of the signs, I'll just go through the
Sure.
rest quickly. If you notice an increased use of drugs and alcohol, anxiety. Anxiety is a huge one. I think it's often overlooked because oftentimes we associate depression and depressive symptoms with
Mhm.
suicide, but I think anxiety has a huge role as well. So anxiety and panic attacks can become really debilitating and can be overwhelming and stressful, and it can lead people to just want to get away from it. So
Yeah.
that's something to keep in mind. Anxiety, agitation, reckless behaviors, sleeping too much or too little, withdrawing,
Hmm.
isolating themselves, withdrawing, not, like I mentioned, not going out, not spending time with family, not being with friends, um, showing rage or talking about seeking revenge, having mood swings. So, the list goes on, but that's just some of the most important, prominent signs to keep an eye out for. And again, this doesn't necessarily mean that the person will commit suicide, but just things to keep an eye out for and open a discussion around so
Hmm.
that if that thought is there and if that exists, there can be an open communication around it and
Right.
hopefully help the person find another option besides suicide.
And I think, what's important, as you're saying, like anxiety can be related. There's so many things. And also, sometimes people have misconceptions of what mental illness looks like. So they think if someone's depressed, or if they're telling jokes and laughing, they can't be depressed,
Right.
which is so not the case. I remember seeing videos, and a heartbreaking, of Chester Bennington, lead singer of Linkin Park, who took his own life. I think it was
Robin
about a year.
Williams,
Yeah,
too.
and Robin Williams too. I saw videos of him just shortly before, though, Chester had taken his life, laughing and joking with his family. So I hear sometimes parents will say that, like, what if your child is depressed? They say, oh, no, he laughs a lot or he tells jokes. And saying jokes sometimes doesn't mean much. Or like you said, Robin Williams or many comedians are actually depressed at times or dealing with a lot of mental health issues. So just because someone is looking okay in a moment, depression doesn't mean 100% of the time they're sad.
So, an actual quote that I read from Robin Williams recently about this, I'm going to read to you guys because I think it's really important. He said, I think the saddest people always try their hardest to make people happy. because they know what it feels like to feel absolutely worthless, and they don't want anybody else to feel like that. So again, and related to what you're saying,
Yeah.
it's really, really sad, but it's true. The laughing, the jokes, the comedy, none of those are indicators of the
Right.
person's mental health.
And if anything, sometimes when it's to that extent, it could be that they're compensating for something in a way like what he's saying, or
Right, it's a
they don't want to
defense.
show you their sadness, so they're doing that, or they don't want anyone else to feel as sad as they're feeling. So, these things you have to really pay close attention. And this is why when we say, listening to your kids isn't just about hearing their words, it's watching their actions, their behaviors, so many things. You can't just rely on a few sources, and that's something, to be aware of. So if you're thinking or worried about your child being suicidal, don't be afraid to bring up that conversation. And we might talk a bit after the break about how to introduce this topic, because I think a lot of parents are petrified. They're so scared of how to bring this up, and that's one of the reasons why they don't bring it up.
Right.
So we'll talk a bit about that after the break with my guest, clinical psychologist Dr. Jennifer Galvan. You're listening to In Session with Dr. Farid Holakouee. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Studio number 310-441-0555. I'm joined by Jennifer Galvan, clinical psychologist. We are talking about suicide. And, we've talked a lot about suicide, but now we want to talk about talking about suicide with your kids, because like we said earlier, one of the reasons why parents avoid it, just like why we avoid a lot of taboo topics, is because we get uncomfortable about talking about it, and we don't know if we know how to talk about it. So I think you have some pointers on how parents can prepare and then kind of execute those conversations. So what
Yeah,
do you have for
earlier
that?
when you were talking about grad school and how we were taught to ask these questions directly and how uncomfortable it was, I think a lot of people can relate to that. The biggest thing that I learned from that situation in grad school was to be direct and clear and to use the words. And so you definitely don't want to ask questions like, "You're not thinking about killing yourself, are you?" Because that's already implying the answer that you want to hear. And it doesn't
Yeah.
leave a lot of room
Right.
for the child to be open and honest and share their feelings. So it's really, really important. And I know I keep emphasizing the importance of being direct, but it truly is really imperative that we're direct and we ask questions like, "Are you thinking about suicide? Are you
Right.
thinking about killing yourself?" It sounds really harsh and it's difficult for us to say, but another piece to that is think about what you want to say to your child and rehearse it so that it's not so uncomfortable when it comes to the time when you're going to have this conversation. If in the beginning of grad school when we would say it, it was definitely more uncomfortable than it is this many years later. And we've said it so many times that it's become the norm. And
Right.
that's the place that you want to get to, being really direct. What do you think about suicide? Is it something that your friends talk about? Have you ever thought about suicide? Have your friends thought about suicide? I mean, just waiting for their response and being direct is really, really important.
And I think, something you said, it's important to prepare, think about it. Even, you can look up things online or hear some of the things that we're saying might, give you some guidance, but recognize that it's going to be an uncomfortable conversation no matter what. And I say that so you don't think, even I'll say for me with clients still, it's a different topic than if I say, "Do you have any siblings?" I don't feel, there's a little more anxiety when you bring up suicide because it is more significant. Yes, it's much more comfortable than it was for me 10 years ago, but it's still something that we know it's not going to be easy conversation. So be ready for that. And I think something you told me about before we went on the air was how actually you could even mention that in the conversation to say, this is actually, even for me, a hard conversation to have. And that can in a way break the ice and make it okay for them to be uncomfortable with it too. And that's okay.
Yeah, being open and honest about how you're feeling, again, just leaves room for them to be open and honest about how they're feeling. So, you can say, "This is a hard subject for me to talk about. I never thought this was something I'd be talking to you about, but I think it's really important." Acknowledge your discomfort. That way you give your child permission to also acknowledge his or her discomfort.
Right. Yeah. And I think parents think sometimes they have to be knowledgeable about everything, know every answer, be
Yeah, well put
infinitely
together.
and wise about everything. But I think it's very okay to let kids know, I don't know about this much, or I'm not sure about this, but I want to talk to you about it, or I don't have all the answers, but I thought we should at least be able to talk about it.
And also another major aspect is showing your vulnerability.
Hmm.
I mean, again, that just shows them that it's okay. They don't have to be perfect. They can be vulnerable as
Yeah.
well.
Right.
Remember that talking about death is always frightening
Yep.
in any way, shape, or form. And so, like you said, it's never going to be a comfortable conversation.
Hmm.
Open, yes, but never is it going to be a
Yep.
comfortable, happy discussion to
Right,
have.
exactly. And speaking of, uncomfortable conversations, they are never going to be easy, but timing is also very important.
Right. So timing is everything. You know, think about when it would be a good time and a good opportunity to bring this topic up, because obviously a person's having friends over, they're, watching a movie, not a great time, maybe a car ride, time when you're alone, even, something unfortunate that comes up in the media that draws attention could be a good opportunity to bring up
Hmm.
the topic.
Right. And I think that's very important. And parents, especially because you're so uncomfortable about this conversation, you might just want to get it over with. So you might have it at the wrong time, or you might just want to say your piece and say, well, I talked about it. But what you want to make sure you're having, and I always emphasize this to parents, not just about suicide, but even about much less serious topics, is you want to have a conversation, a dialogue, not a monologue. So if you're just talking to them, that's not a conversation. And so if you see that's happening, recognize that, okay, maybe they're not ready to engage, maybe it's not the right time, and don't consider that conversation having been had. Consider, okay, I opened it up, let them know. And you can even say, maybe we can talk about this another time, or would there be another time better for you? But make sure it's not just a one-sided conversation.
Yeah, like it's also important to leave some space for them to
Mm-hmm.
be able to respond,
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes this becomes very didactic, and
Mm-hmm.
we're standing there telling them what to do or what we think or things like that, and we don't leave a lot of room for them to respond, ask questions, consider their perspective. So another piece to this is that it's really important to listen to what your child has to say about
Mm-hmm.
it. um, let them ask questions, hear their worries, listen to their concerns, respond to what they offer you, take it in and
Mm-hmm.
digest it and respond back, so that there's a dialogue and a conversation, and it's not just the parent telling the children or the child something and the child's just silent.
Right. Yeah, exactly. A conversation. And that means, like you said, leaving space. Because I think a parent might prepare what they want to say and then turn it into a speech. And then they just talk for 3 minutes and it ends. But you want to
Right.
make it where it's a conversation where you ask some questions like, I don't know, what do you think about these
Be
things? Or have you thought
curious.
of, yeah, what have you thought about this? Or did you hear about that in the news? Or what are your thoughts? Make sure you have some of those open-ended questions, especially not just yes, no questions, because you want to create, again, the conversation is what we're talking about. And this isn't a one conversation issue. So it's not like, okay, we had one car ride, we talked about it, we never have to talk about it again. You're opening it up so now that this can be a topic of future conversations as well, which also hopefully takes off the pressure that you don't think, I have to get everything taken care of in
Right.
this conversation. I have to have a perfect conversation with my kid where I teach him or her everything and everything gets answered. No, it's probably not going to be that. You should expect it not. And also even let them know, say, I'm glad we talked about this, and maybe we can talk about it some more later. Or also, anytime you want to talk about this some more, please let me know. Like, I'm sure there's more things, or I might think of questions. So let them know this is not the end of this conversation. It's been opened up, and now it's a topic that can be covered.
Yeah, absolutely. Another piece to this is explaining mental illness as you would a physical illness
Hmm.
without blame or judgment.
Hmm.
We see a lot of people that have taken their lives and they look perfectly healthy and they seem happy. They have careers, they have families, they have cars, they have homes, they have all these
Hmm.
things. So it appears as though their life is quote unquote perfect. But mental illness is very similar to physical illness. It's just invisible and it's not seen. And, I found a quote online that's really, I think, depicts this really well. And it's somebody saying, our thoughts and feelings come from our brain. And sometimes a person's brain can get very sick. The sickness can cause a person to feel very badly inside. It also makes a person's thoughts get all jumbled and mixed up. So sometimes they can't think clearly.
Hmm.
Some people can't think of any other way of stopping the hurt they feel inside. They don't understand that they don't have to feel that way, that they can get help. But because mental illness is invisible, because you can't see it externally or physically, it often can get overlooked, and people are left shocked when there's a suicide because everything on the outside looked so perfect and well put together.
Yeah, I think, and what you said, not blaming people for mental illness. Unfortunately, they do. Someone gets sick, someone unfortunately gets cancer, breaks a bone, something. They get all sorts of sympathy and empathy and care. But a lot of times with mental illness, there's definitely a part where we kind of blame. Are they just being depressed or wanting to be depressed? Is it kind of
Or
like a choice?
attention
Yeah, is it
seeking, or
for
they
attention, or are they just
want
there's a negative
sympathy.
person? But we know there's real things. I was just at my seminar yesterday. I mentioned this because people sometimes say, "Oh, depression, it's just in your head." And
Yeah,
sometimes they say, "Yeah, it's just in your head. There's something going on in your brain
right.
that's a real
It's
thing."
actually in your brain.
Right. It's not just in your head like an idea or an imagination. It's actually something very real. And so we have to recognize that this is a real illness, just like physical illnesses, and should be treated with the same level of care, respect, understanding, and compassion. And I hope not just when it comes to suicide, but in general, that families make it seem that way in their families, that you could have a bad mood sometimes. You're going to be anxious. You're going to have these feelings, and you're not responsible in a negative way for feeling bad or for having a mental illness. We're going to address it and talk about it just like we would if you had a cold or something more serious. We're going to talk about it, and you don't have to feel bad about any of your feelings or the things that you're going through.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I think we have a long way to go
Yes.
because the stigma attached to mental illness is still very strong. But I think you're absolutely right to make sure people know blame is not part of the conversation when it comes to their feelings or what they're going through.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the person already feels terrible. The last thing that they need is blame or judgment based on what they're going through. It's not in their control how they're feeling.
Hmm.
I hope those are some few helpful tips as to where to at least get started. Again, every child is different, every parent is different, so everybody can add their own little twist to it,
Hmm.
whatever they think that will be a better, more positive experience in this discussion with their children.
Yeah.
Um,
And you know your child better, you know your relationship with them. So,
Right.
yeah, there really isn't a script that we can send you that this is how you talk to your kid. These are some ideas to keep in mind, but you know your child. Maybe for you it'll starting with a joke but making it serious, or maybe it's going to be about I don't know what, maybe some video game they play or whatever it is. You know them better than we do, obviously. So, see what's the right way to introduce it for you with them, but think about some of these issues that Dr. Galvan brought up.
Yeah, it's important to find a way to connect, to create the connection, and then to continue the conversation.
Right. Now, we just have a few minutes left. And what's also important to touch on for sure is another reason why people are afraid to bring this conversation up is because, like, well, what if there really is a suicidal threat or suicide is really real? The suicide ideation is
Active.
serious, active, exactly. What do I do or what do we do then? So, what do you have to say about that?
So there's several options if that's the case. Obviously, it's important to not panic. That will just add more anxiety and overwhelming feelings.
Hmm.
So emergency room is always an option, calling 911. There's inpatient hospitals that have a whole treatment team. There's psychiatrists, there's different levels of psychologists and therapists and social workers, case managers that can all come together to come up with an appropriate treatment plan that can stabilize the person and then send them on to a lower level of care, which may be an outpatient treatment program, it may be a private practice setting. This is even a conversation that can be had with your primary care doctor.
Hmm.
Really opening up about this to anyone is helpful because that will lead to some direction for treatment. And that's the key here. It's really, really important that you head down a road of treatment in whichever way that's possible. Meeting with a psychiatrist for a medication evaluation, psychotherapy, in conjunction with medication is most effective. There's always the National Suicide Prevention
Yeah.
Lifeline. So their phone number is 1-800-273 8255, 800-273-TALK. They're available 24 hours, 7 days a week. And they have not only people that are on the phone that can talk with you if you're feeling suicidal, but also several resources available. There's a crisis text line. So you text the word home to 741 741, and somebody will respond to that. And there's also all sorts of chat services, online chat services that are available online that you could Google and find as well.
And so, yeah, there are these resources available, and I hope people take advantage of them. Thankfully, many people do, and they get help, and it literally saves lives. But again, we have to be willing to have these difficult conversations. We know it's not easy to talk about suicide, and that's why we want to talk about it. And like Dr. Galvan said, even use the word suicide. We have to be real about it. We can't avoid it. It doesn't make it go away. And if your child brings up suicide in any way, shape, or form, please never ignore it. Make sure you have a conversation about it at minimum, and if needed, take action. I know you want to make.
Yeah, and along with that, one final note, if they do bring it up, always take precaution, store away any medications,
Mhm.
firearms, lethal means by, don't
Right.
take the chance, limit the access. So even if the thoughts come, there's limited access that will give more time and more opportunity to save someone's life.
Absolutely right. That's great practical advice. And if you're feeling suicidal or have thoughts of suicide, know that you're not alone. Many people do feel those feelings, but there is help out there. And feelings are temporary, they don't last forever. So even if you're feeling down, even if things are feeling hopeless, it doesn't mean you will always feel that way. So please ask for help. Help is there for you. And parents, be willing to talk to your kids about it because they're going to need your help. Dr. Jennifer Galvan, thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you, as always, for having me on the show.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone listening out there and Amir here in the studio. You've been listening to In Session with Dr. Farid Holakouee. Have a wonderful night.